Master, I salute you. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by James Haughton Woods. The continued existence in another form means the throwing away of its own form as consisting of mutations and the exchanging of this for that, the absolutely changeless. Just as the power of the intellect, chitta, although the aspects of divide themselves into one alteration after another, does not relapse from its own self and remains absolutely unchanged, so likewise gold and etc. would remain absolutely unchanged, a proposition which you do not admit. So matter is something not different from its external aspects. This objection he refutes by saying this. He replies, involves no weakness. Why? Because we do not maintain an absolute reality. Had we to admit that the absolute permanence of matter as the power of intellect, chitta, then we should have lain open to this taunt. We, however, do not take our stand upon the doctrine of absolute permanence. On the contrary, we say that all these three worlds do not merely pass out of their phenomenalized, individualized forms as producing effects, fulfilling a promise. Why? For we are bound to deny that the world is permanent on the ground of a source of valid ideas. For if the water jar were not to pass out of its individual phenomenalized form, then even though reduced to the condition of pot shards or of broken bits, it would be, as before, clearly apperceived as a water jar, and it would have to fulfill the purpose of a water jar. But this cannot be. Consequently, the three worlds are not permanent. Very well then, suppose that the jar does not exist permanently, insofar as it is not apperceived, and does not fulfill the purpose of a water jar, because, like the sky lotus, it is illusory. Tucha. In reply to this, he says, even after it has passed out, it is not absolutely illusory existence, so that it would be absolutely impermanent. Why? Because we are obliged to deny its annihilation on the ground of a source of valid ideas. To explain whatever is illusory existence cannot be apperceived or produce effects, quite as in the case of the sky lotus, whereas these three worlds are from time to time apperceived and do produce effects, and so are not absolutely illusory existences. Similarly, we should cite as illustrations, proving existence, sattvahatu, capacity for rising into consciousness, materially, fitness for external aspects and time variations, and intensities and others, which proofs are wanting in the case of the sky lotus are the man's horns. Sky lotus and man's horns. So, which one of you has horns and which one of you has a sky lotus? Oh, well, obviously it's not talking about which are absolutely illusory existences. Similarly, the power of intellect, chitta, but on the contrary, it is only, in some respects, permanent, and thus it is established that it enters into mutations. So we must understand that in the states of the lump of clay and in the following states, the effects, such as the water jar, which are yet to come, have an existence. The objector says this may be true, but if in effect, even after it is passed out of individual phenomenalized existence, exist, why is it not apperceived? The reply is this: on being refunded, that is, resolved into its own cause, a subtle form, that is, one not capable of being seen, and hence there is no apperception of it. Having thus substantiated the mutation of the external aspect, he substantiates the mutation of time variation also, insofar as they are inseparably connected with each other, by saying, in the mutation of time variation, the meaning is that each time variation is inseparably connected with the other two. The objector says, why, when one time variation is in connection with other time variations, why are the other time variations not perceived? How then are these connected with the former? In reply, he says, take the case of a man. For an absence of experience does not do away with that which is established by the source of a valid idea. For the very fact that this time variation has been made to rise in consciousness is the source of the valid idea for the real existence of these other time variations, because a non-existent thing, such as a man's horns, cannot be made to rise in consciousness. He sets up the objection uttered by another when he says here, in the mutation of time variation, if, when an external aspect is present, it is at the same time past and future, then all the three time forms would be confounded, and if the time forms are to be in successive times, then it would follow that the production of the non-existent becomes possible. He meets the objection with the words, we meet this objection thus, for the existence of external aspects in the present only is established by experience. From this it follows that external aspects are in relation to earlier and to latter time. Why does it follow? Because, of course, a non-existent does not come into being, nor is an existent annihilated. As he says, because if this were so, the mind stuff could never. For mind stuff at a time following after anger is experienced as having the external aspect of passion, and if passion did not exist at the time of anger, insofar as passion was at that time future, how then could passion rise into consciousness? And if it should not rise into consciousness, how could it be experienced? The objector continues, if this be granted, why would there not still be confusion of time forms? The question is contained in the phrase, moreover, it is not possible. What, Kim, is also cause is also there. What, Kim, cause is there for not confounding the time forms, and cha is used in the sense of but the answer given in the words the three time variations cannot possibly exist simultaneously. In what? In one fluctuation of mind stuff, but in successive times it is possible for each one of the time variations to exist in its phenomenal forms by the operation of the conditions which phenomenalize it. The time variation, since the discussion of the time variation depends on the things which have time variations, and therefore the time variations, insofar as they have the form of the things which have time variations, belong to or have the same nature as tadvata. These, that is, the things which have time variations on the same point, he states his concurrence of opinion with pancha chikka. On the same point, he states his concurrence of opinion with the master by saying, it has been said. As has been explained before, he brings his discussion to a close by the word hence. The time forms are not confounded insofar as external aspects which are opposed to each other. For instance, those that have become visible and those that have become invisible are funded in their own cause. He gives an illustration in the words, To take an example, previously it was shown that anger must be thought to be in relation with passion. Now a passion referring to one object is shown to be in relation to a passion referring to another object. He takes up the subject referred to in the illustration by saying a similar explanation. In the case of time variation, an objector says, even when it is assumed that the mutations are not absolutely distinct, the distinction may yet exist. So when the external aspect, or the time variation, or the intensity alters, the substance in that it is not distinct from them should also alter. And it is just this that we do not accept, because it is contrary to the experience that the permanent substance is inseparably connected with its own states, which are impermanent. In reply to this, he says, the three time forms do not belong to the substance, because it is the external aspects which are distinct from it that have the three time forms. It is the external aspects which are connected with the three time forms, is made clear by the words, these external aspects. Having a time variation means manifested, that is present. Do not have a time variation means unmanifested, that is future or present, future or past. Of these two, those that have a time variation, when they attain to the various intensities, either to powerfulness or to weakness, are referred to as being different from other intensities, but not from other matter. The word intensity is here used in the sense of external aspect and of time variation and of intensity. What he means to say is this: now it is experience alone which determines the difference or the absence of difference between the substances and the external aspects and the other mutations, since the external aspects and the rest are not absolutely identical with the substance, to the extent that the common nature of the external aspect and of the other mutations should have the form of the substance. Nor is there absolute difference to the extent that the common nature of the external aspects should be as different as horses and cows. Experience, moreover, although not establishing the fact that there is absolute identity or difference, does show the substance as one, and as persisting in the external aspects and other mutations, which have the quality of coming into and passing out of existence, and it does not exclude the external aspects from each other. All this is experienced by everyone, so we conform ourselves to this experience. We are not at liberty to throw it away and dispose the experiences of the external aspects as we like. On this same point, he gives an example from ordinary life in the words, thus the same stroke, just as the stroke, which in itself is precisely the same, the relation to the previous positions is called 100 and other names. So the substance, which in itself is precisely the same, is repeatedly given a name in accordance with the alteration of its external aspect and its time variation and intensity. This is the meaning. To illustrate the matter, he gives another simile in the words, so too the same woman. At this point, he raises an objection made by an opponent by saying intensity. When there is a mutation of intensity, that is a mutation of external aspect and of time variation and of intensity, one would be involved in a fault with regard to the absolute permanence of the substance and the external aspect and of the time variation and of the intensity. He asks, how? He gives the answer in the words, on the ground that the functional activity the time form. For we can see that the functional activity of that which is future in its form as belonging to the Kurds, Kurds with the C, not Kurds as in the ethnic group, is present as belonging to milk, because the functional activity of the future is shut off by this functional activity of the present. For this reason, when the external aspect, which is the time variation, laksana, of the Kurds, although existent in the milk, does not exert its own functional activity, then the undertaking of the business of the effects to be accomplished by curdling and other changes is called future, and is called present when it is thus active, and past when it has done the business of curdling and other changes and stopped. To this extent, then it must follow that the substance and the external aspects and the time variations and the intensities, although persisting in all three times, are absolutely permanent. For permanence is in existence at all times. And in these four cases, whether they exist at all times or do not exist at all times, there is no production. This much only is the time variation, laksana, of the absolutely permanent, and in the case of the power of the intellect, chitta, chakta, also, which is absolutely permanent. There is no other special feature. This is the point. He meets the objection in the words, but the alleged weakness does not exist. There is no weakness there. Why? Because although the substrate, gunnin, is permanent, the aspects, gunna, suffer antagonisms. The one of the aspects being capable of being overcome and the others of overcoming. This is their variety. What he means to say is this. Although there is existence at all times in the case of all four, still, insofar as there is variety in the antagonisms of the aspects, gunna, in that various evolved forms, which this variety consists, become visible or invisible. And insofar as they enter into mutations, there is no absolute permanence, whereas in the case of the power of the intellect, chitta, chakta, there is no becoming visible or becoming invisible of evolved forms which belong to itself. Thus, this is absolutely permanent. As they say, the learned call that permanent, the nature of which does not perish. The variety of antagonisms is the cause of the variety of the evolved forms, in the case of both the evolving substance and the evolved substance, is shown by the words just as. Vimarda occurs only once in the Bhastya. But Chaspe uses it 4 times. Other than that. Okay. Just as the arrangement of parts, as distinguished, laksana, by being a mutation of earth and of other coarse elements, is itself merely an external aspect, and has a beginning and an end, in that it becomes invisible. And so sound and the rest, the subtle elements, sound and touch, and color and taste, and smell, are not perishable, as compared with their own products, and do not, like them, become invisible. He shows how this is in the case of the evolving matter by the words, so the resoluble. To it, the term evolved form, vikara, is applied. But the power of thought, chitta chakta, is not subject to this kind of evolution of form. This is the point. Having thus taken up, by way of illustration, both the evolved matter and the evolving cause, which are well enough known to thinking persons, he takes up in the case of the evolved matter only, which is well enough known to the popular mind, and the variety of the antagonisms of the aspects, guna, which leads to the variety in the mutations of external aspect out of time variation and of intensity, by saying, the following serves as an illustration. There is no necessity that the mutations of intensity should belong to the time variations only, for all three external aspect and time variations and intensity are expressed by the words intensity. Therefore, the one kind of mutation is intensity, which is common to all. Accordingly, he says, thus the substance only. He gives the distinguishing characteristic of the mutation, which includes all, by saying, in a permanent. The word external aspect is an expression for external aspect, and for time variation, and for intensity, insofar as it is that in which they inhere among these. Okay. So, time, space, and matter are limitations we have to admit exist and have to operate within. And time is I guess, the most perfect example of those, in which our own self-mastery doesn't change the fact that time is what it is. Past, present, future, it's occurring or occurred in a way that's is completely independent of what we want. But let's figure out what the actual limits are, rather than mere assumptions, or somebody said that something's a limit. Well, they say don't stick your finger in the light socket, you don't stick your finger in the light socket, or don't drink poison. That's pretty good advice, but you know what I mean. Hopefully. 14. A substance conforms itself to the quiescent and the uprisen and indeterminate external aspects. Okay. Murti Yogyata, used in the sense of... Okay. An external aspect is, to speak precisely, only a power of the substance as limited by its pre-established harmony with regard to effects. It is known as an actual existence, of which the existence is inferred by the kind of effect which it generates, as one or another form of the single substance. Of these forms, that is called present, and if be that the external aspect is passing through the state of its peculiar functional activity, this is different from the external aspects, both the quiescent and the indeterminable states, but when it is rejoined the general or latent form, then how could that external aspect be distinguished from any other, since it is then of the very nature of the substance itself? There are, as everyone knows, three of these external aspects within the substance: the quiescent and the uprisen and the indeterminable. Of these, quiescent are those that have come to rest by finishing their functional activity. The uprisen are those in active function, and these uprisen are immediately contagious. Some antara, to the future time relation, while the past come after the present. Why do not the present come after the past? Well, the past is obviously before the present, because there is no relation of antecedent and consequent between them. The relation of the antecedent and the consequent in the case of the future and the present is not the same as the relation in the case of the past. And of the present. Therefore, there is no latter external aspect immediately contiguous to the past. Consequently, the future is only immediately contiguous as being antecedent to the present. Now, the indeterminable external aspects, what are they? Everything containing the essence of everything, upon which it has been said, that which, in the various forms of taste and other subtle elements, contains the mutations of the coarse elements of water and of earth, is found in plants. Likewise, that which is mutable in plants is found in animals, and of animals in plants. In this sense, in so far as the common nature is not destroyed, we use the term everything contains the essence of everything, still because of connexion with place and time and form and cause, and external aspects do not, of course, manifest themselves at the same time, which passes through a succession of these external aspects, whether manifested or unmanifested, and which has as its essence the generic form and the particular, and that which is, and which has its essence as the generic form and the particular, and which is present in all, but differentiated form from them. Unbayan, that is a substance. But the Yogacara, who holds that the world is nothing but external aspects without a substance present in all, but different forms from them, for him there would be no experience. Why would this be so? The reply is, how could one consciousness of a subject of experience, Bok Rut Venna, be held responsible for a deed done by another consciousness? And there would also be no memory of this consciousness, for there is no such thing as recollection by one consciousness of something seen by another consciousness, and it is the substance permanently present in all, but different from them, which upon the recognition of a thing is recognized as participating in the alteration of the external aspect. Consequently, it is not true that this world is nothing more than external aspects without a substance, present in all, but different from them. Now, one of the things that we have, that we may have been thinking about in this reading in particular, is the aspect of predestination. A God who has ordained the causes, right? And effects, and how that works. He knows the beings of consciousness, how their consciousness is going to operate, and operate upon these things that have certain laws of action and reaction upon them. So it's not fatalism to say predestination would be to say that, okay, a God who has determined these things, he knows what type of people we are and the type of choices we're going to make upon these things. So all the outcomes would be already set forth like that, still allowing for our free will. I don't know if I articulated that too well, but he gives the distinguishing characteristic of this substance, which is the threefold mutation belongs to the Sutra 14. Among these, a substance conforms itself to quiescent and uprisen and indeterminable external aspects. A substance, Dharman, is a thing that has external aspects, Dharma, and because, unless one knows the external aspects, one cannot know the substance, he makes known what the external aspect is in the world pre-established harmony. The substance means a material object, such as clay. Only a power, that is the power of producing the dust and the lump of clay and the water jar. This is the external aspect insofar as these are contained in this substance in an unphenomenalized state. This is the point. An objector says, insofar as these exist therein, in an unphenomenalized state, they may become visible from within it. But how can the capacity to fetch water in a jar and similar purposeful acts, which could not have been got out of their case, the clay, be obtained by them, that is, the finished products? In reply to this, he says, as limited by its pre-established harmony. The power to produce the water jar is defined as pre-established harmony for things which fetch water. Hence, the power to fetch water and the other purposeful acts are also obtained by the water jars and other things from their own cause only. Thus, the capacity to fetch water is not accidental with regard to the substances. This is the point. There is another interpretation. One might be asked, what are the substances? The reply is, of the substances as limited by its pre-established harmony. One might be asked, what is an external aspect? The reply is this: an external aspect is only a power. This means that an external aspect is only a pre-established harmony belonging to these substances. Hence it is proven that the thing which has this external aspect is the substance. Thus it becomes clear. He describes the source of valid ideas, which proves the real existence of these external aspects in the words, and it is inferred by the kind of effect which generates of a single substance in one or another form, as dust, or as a lump of clay, or as a water jar. This is the meaning, and it differs because there are evidently different ideas, different effects. This is another way of putting it. It is observed or apperceived. With regard to these external aspects, he describes the difference between the lump of clay, which strikes upon the thinking substance of experience and is present, and the quiescent state of the clay as dust, and the indeterminable state of the clay as water jar, by saying of these forms that is called present. If there be no difference, then the dust and the water jar would have their functional activity coextensive with that of the lump of clay. This is the point. But in the case of unphenomenalized lumps of clay, the establishment of the difference as stated above is impossible. This he says in the words, but when. But then is this difference? By establishment of what difference will there be differentiation? Having thus mentioned that there is the establishment of a difference between the external aspects, he analyzes this difference in the words, there are, as everyone knows. The word uprisen means present. He now deduces the priority and the sequence of the time forms in the words and these. A question is raised in the words, why does not? For what reason does not the present come after the past? This is the meaning. The reason is there is no relation of antecedent and consequent between them. By speaking of the object, that is the absence of antecedent and consequent,